What's up, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls around the world? I would like to welcome you back to the Real Talk with Zuby podcast. It's the first one of the new year, 2021. Here we are. We all know last year was a tough year, and we don't know how this one is going to be just yet, but we do hope that it's going to be better. And while we are on that positive vibe, I want to introduce today's guest. His name is Stu Massengill. He is an entrepreneur. He is a peak performance strategist for Tony Robbins, and he is also the founder of Finding Direction. So welcome to this show, Stu. How you doing, man?
I'm doing excellent. Thank you so much for having me, brother.
Happy to have you here, man. So I've done a little brief intro there, but for people who are not familiar with you, tell them a little bit about you.
Yeah. My name's Stu Massengill. I am a national trainer for a gentleman named Tony Robbins, who maybe some of those listening have heard of. Tony's, arguably the number one success coach on the planet. And so I'm a national trainer with him, basically pre-COVID. That's traveling 340 days a year alongside him, going into companies and working with different organizations. Now with COVID, we're more virtual. So we're doing that all in a virtual way now. So no traveling. And then on top of that, I'm the founder of Finding Direction, which is kind of two-part. One, we have a podcast that's all about helping people figure out what they want to do with their life.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the second front, we're launching something called Finding Direction University. And that's kind of more of a hands-on approach where we're helping people go through that process of figuring out, really what you want to do with your life.
Awesome, man. So
Yeah.
when I talk to people on the show, I like to, it's called Real Talk with Zuby. So I like to kind of go deep. So rather than starting off with everything you're doing right now, I'm curious to learn more about the backstory. I was reading through your bio, and it sounds like you've had an interesting life. You've had a lot of ups and downs. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. I would say two of probably the biggest ups and downs that I've had was when I was 19, I was introduced to a business by a friend, and basically he and I temporarily dropped out of school, went full force in this over the next 4 years, built a business that did about $8 million in revenue.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like what I thought I was going to do for the rest of my life. And I was living that cliche saying of you never work a day in your life if you love what you do.
Mm-hmm.
And basically overnight that was taken away from me, more or less, to just save a long story. And I kind of got in this place of what the heck am I supposed to do with my life? Like I thought I was living my purpose. And then all of a sudden the next day that purpose was taken away from me. And so that was probably one of the biggest things that I faced. And that's kind of what birthed Finding Direction, is that like, that was one of the most painful things I ever went through in my life, is feeling like, why am I here? What's my purpose? Why am I on this planet? Like, it was just such a painful place to just be lost, really.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really one of the biggest things. And then in that same space, when I was trying to figure out my life, I was diagnosed with testicular cancer. And so that happened when I was 23, 2 days before my 24th birthday.
Mm-hmm.
And I was on this whole, I'm going to find myself through traveling. I'm going to go travel for 7-8 months and figure out who I am. And long story short, more or less 2 days into that, I was diagnosed with testicular cancer, canceled the whole trip, and then went through that whole process of, recovering from that. So I would say those are definitely two of the biggest obstacles that have kind of come up in my life.
Yeah,
But
I mean,
strengthened me.
if you're comfortable, I'd love to kind of go into those in a little bit more detail, because that's like a very high level overview. But I mean,
Yeah.
someone listening will be like, "Wait, hang on. Like, firstly, explain this. $1 million business built by the age of 20, right?" And then you'll also have people like, quite, how did you? What's it like to be such a young man and get diagnosed with testicular cancer? I mean, that's not something that happens to most people. We all know people who have been diagnosed with cancer or who have suffered from it, etc. But for it to hit someone at such a young age, I mean, that must have really, especially that timing. I mean, what was that like? Can you go into a little more detail?
Yeah. So for me, I am an innately a extraordinarily positive human being.
Good.
Someone once told me a quote. They said, every moment of sadness is a moment of happiness you'll never get back. And I try to live that to the deepest core, because I truly believe it. Like, if you're upset, if you're angry, if you have some negative emotion, in turn, that means you're losing a positive emotion you could have had.
Sure.
And so when I was diagnosed with cancer, I was supposed to be in New Zealand for 7 months. And when, I went through the whole process of like going to the hospital. And to just break it down for any guys listening to this, all I would say is just check your equipment,
Mm.
and go get regular checkups from the doctor. But basically, I noticed some like abnormalities, and I went to the hospital, and for like 2 days, they were just like, you know, no idea really what's going on. Doing like ultrasounds, scans, all these different things. And basically at the end of the 2 days, they brought me into the office, the classic like movie scene, like, all right, sit down here. And they're like, all right, sir, like you have some sort of tumor. It could be benign, meaning
Mm.
nothing, or it can be cancerous. But we suggest you get on the next plane flight home and go see your doctor. And so basically I did that. I went home. And probably 12 hours later, I was sitting in a room with my doctor, and he confirmed. He was like, yeah, this is testicular cancer.
Mm.
And so for me, I think the biggest thing that I got from that is, again, I'm a really, really positive person. So when I was told that I had cancer, for me, all it meant is this is supposed to happen. This is part of my story. This is going to be something that'll make me stronger as a human being. And it's not going to kill me because I'm not done with my time here on this world.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the perception I took. But for a lot of the people around me, they sort of took a perception of, like, holy shit, you have cancer. Like that,
Yeah.
that's like scary.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but what really helped me is I went to everyone that was close to me and I said, hey, don't treat me any differently. Don't act like I have something that can kill me, because if you treat me in that way, that can plant a seed in my brain
Mm.
that can then ultimately grow. And we don't want that seed to grow. So that was probably the most powerful part for me, was just building a community around me that supported the beliefs that I wanted to have through that process.
Mm.
And it's interesting that even, as I'm healthy from the cancer now and go throughout life, that's now become a reoccurring theme of how do I surround myself with people that will support me in the beliefs that I want to have in my life, that'll support me to live the life that I want. So,
Yeah.
I would say those are a couple kind of the nuggets in the deeper of what happened there.
Yeah, no doubt, man. I mean, how did you at that time? How
Yeah.
did you have that mindset? Like, where did that come from? Right, mindset is something that we all build and work up over time, but most young people, if they're in their teens, their early
Right.
20s, etc., even up until their 30s. I mean, some people never get their mindset
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm wondering at that time. I mean, where did you get that? I mean, it's kind of like a level of stoicism almost,
Yeah.
to be able to frame it, especially at the time. I mean, maybe in hindsight, I think when things
Right.
happen to us in hindsight, you can look back at them and frame them in a way that now that you're out of that situation. But I mean, at that moment in time, where did you kind of get are you just naturally wired that way? Or was there like something you'd read or something you'd experienced prior to that really ingrained that in you?
Yeah, I love that. So I would say it's twofold. One, my mom, she's a coach, and
Mm-hmm.
so I kind of grew up with parents kind of like pronging me here and there of like little positive messages. But I honestly didn't really become aware of that until I was 19, and I really went like full force into business. And in that process, I became like utterly, deeply obsessed with personal development.
Mm-hmm.
I would go to conferences once a quarter. I would be reading books every week. I would be listening to audios every single day. Like I lived, breathed, and ate personal development. And because of that, and I did that for about 4 years,
Okay.
um, it just built this incredible mindset, I guess you could say.
Mm.
Because I was just learning from really successful people. That's kind of what brought me back to Tony Robbins, because
Yeah.
when I was 19, I was first introduced to Tony. And then 8 years later, I decided to start working with him.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, man, I would say it was really the 4 years that I was just immersed into everything I could get my hands on within the personal development world.
Okay. No, that makes sense. I mean, I like gym analogies, and I compare it to, I think just the mind has to be trained just like the body,
Yeah.
right? And it's like, if you take someone who's totally untrained, they've never lifted weights before, and I don't know, you throw on 150 kilos on the squat or on the 100-kilogram bench press or something, right? They'll, unless they're just a freak of nature, right? They're going to get flattened by it. But if
Yeah.
you've done the work over time, then you have the strength to deal with it. I think it's very similar with the mind, where you've already put in that 4 years of work. So when this thing sort of just came sideways at you, you'd already had done the preparation for like that battle of being like, okay, this is
Yeah.
here, and this is how we'll deal with it. Because I mean, let's be real. I mean, most people that would crush a lot of people, man. That would really crush a lot of people.
Yeah, I think you nailed it on the head. It's like our mindset is honestly our most important muscle in our entire body.
Mm.
And like 2020, I mean, cancer is one way to expose it. 2020 is another way to
Yeah,
expose
for
where's your
real.
mindset at,
Yeah.
right? And it's like, we were just talking at it before we hopped on the live. Is that like 2021 is not going to look extraordinarily different than 2020? And it's like if you don't learn to strengthen that muscle, that mindset,
Mm.
then 2021 may flatten you again. If 2020 flattened you, right? If we stay in that analogy, 2021 may do the same exact thing if you can't strengthen that mindset. And so,
Yeah.
something that was interesting that one of my mentors once told me is he says most people in the world, they spend 90% of their income neck down, right?
Okay.
When 80% of your success comes from your mindset, comes from neck up,
Okay, I
right?
get you.
So it's really like, how can we strengthen that muscle, not just through cancer, but even, more relevant as we go into 2021.
Mm. How did you start working with Tony Robbins? How did you meet him?
Yeah, so I originally went to one of Tony's events probably 8 years ago now.
Hmm.
And I just went as like an attendee. I was just trying to learn, and I heard about Tony's live events and that they were incredible. And so I went, and sure enough, my life was massively impacted.
Hmm.
And then over probably the next 7 years, I would just go to his events occasionally. I would volunteer at an event. I went to one of his events in Australia, did some coaching with them, and
Hmm.
then eventually kind of came to a point in my life in that lost space of like, what do I want to do with my life? And I'm a big believer that when you don't know what you want to do with your life, you easily can get overwhelmed because in today's society with social media and all these different outlets, there's sometimes it feels like you're in the middle of an ocean and you don't know which direction to swim,
Hmm.
right? But the reality is like if you look back on your life over the last 5, 10, 20, 30, 40 years, there's probably 3 or 4 or 5 things that you've always been pulled towards, right? Whether that's traveling, whether that's helping people, whether that's marketing, like whatever that is. And for me, one of those buckets was helping people.
Hmm.
And so a concept that I was taught, ironically, by Tony Robbins is something called modeling. And it's that whoever is the best out there at what you want to do, if you can model them, if you can study them, you can compress decades into years.
Hmm.
And so for me, Tony was that person. I call him the GOAT, the greatest of all time.
Yeah.
And so I knew a friend that knew a friend that knew a friend that basically knew someone in the company. And
Hmm.
so I was able to get connected with them and then brought onto the team.
Awesome, man. Awesome.
Yeah.
We were talking about 2020. I want to just jump back to that a second. What was the biggest thing you learned last year?
That's a good question. I would say the biggest thing that I learned in 2020.
Or you can, or if there's multiple, you can give a couple.
Yeah. Um, I would say the power to like have a strong mindset to pivot.
Hmm.
Um, because like you look at this year and I'll just like I've had a front row seat to watching Tony pivot in this world that we're living in.
Hmm.
And one of the craziest parts is like a massive amount of his business came from doing live in-person events with 10,000 people.
Yep.
COVID comes overnight, that's not possible.
Hmm.
And so to really look at how despite a majority of the business being shut down, that he still found a way to show up, to help people, and to grow the business
Hmm.
um, was huge. So, like, I think one of the biggest learnings that I've had is like, despite what's going on in the world, there's always a way.
Yep.
Like, sometimes we get into this place of going, oh, it's just not possible. I can't do it. The circumstances are too against me. COVID's been bigger than anything before.
Hmm.
It's just not going to be able to happen. I call bullshit on that and saying that like there is a way no matter what, if you force yourself to get in a positive state
Hmm.
and look at what are the options, like you can always find a way out of any situation.
Yep.
So I would say that's one of the biggest, I would say that's probably the biggest lesson that I got from 2020.
That's a big one, man. How can people, as someone who studies this and who lives it and breathes it, for someone who is maybe listening to this and who is just feeling like, after the past year, they're just feeling beat down, they're just in a
Yeah.
somewhat, let's not say depressed, but they're in a low state. They've maybe maybe lost their job, they're not seeing their family, not able to see their friends, do all the things they typically enjoy. And that's a lot of people.
Yeah.
What are the tools, or are there any particular tips or strategies that you find are effective to help someone just get and perhaps stay in that positive mindset? Because, let's be real. I mean, the past year has been hard. I'm like you, I'm very optimistic. Like I'm a very positive, ambitious, optimistic person. But man, this past year has been, it's
Crazy.
It's been damaging to the psyche. Like it's been tough. It has been tough. I've had moments where I'm just like, oh my gosh, like I want to like just a combination of anger and like sadness and grief and loss and just like all these things combined, and it's just heavy. So how can people get out of that state?
Yeah, I would say one like simple tool that you can use is that if you can start to understand that at every moment of your life, you're making 3 decisions.
Okay.
And the first decision you're making is, what are you going to focus on? The second one is, what's the meaning that you're going to attach to that? And then the third one finally is, well, then what's the action that comes from that?
Mm-hmm.
And so let's say we're looking at someone that is 2020 has just knocked them on their ass. You're just really not in a good place.
Yeah.
Like, you want to start to ask yourself, well, what am I focusing on? And chances are maybe you're focusing on loss. Maybe you're focusing on 2020 was an awful year. 2020, I lost my job. 2020, I struggled financially. Mm-hmm. And the meaning you're giving from that is that, life sucks. I'm not happy. This isn't shit. 2021 may look the same, right? Maybe that's the meaning you're starting to build. And then the action you take is probably not going to be an action that supports you to get out of that situation. Mm-hmm. Right. So that's maybe one person's perspective. Now, let's say someone else goes, okay, 2020 was shitty. Plain and simple, call it as it is, right? Call a spade a spade. Yeah. 2020 was awful. It was not a good year. But because I got maybe laid off, maybe what I focus on is, well, what's the opportunity here? Did I really love that job? Was that my dream job? Was that the thing that lit me up every single day to feel like that's what I was called here to do? Mm-hmm. If it wasn't, well, then maybe what you focus on is, well, what's the positive that could come from this, right? What is something else that I would want to do that could really allow me to live an incredible life? Yeah. And maybe that's what you start to focus on is, well, what's the positive in this? What's the seed? What's the thing that I could take away and say, hey, 2020, I learned this lesson, right? And then you focus on that. Now, the meaning you give it is, well, hey, maybe there's an opportunity out there for me to do something that I actually really love. And then the action you take is probably one that supports you to get there. Mm-hmm. And so, I would say that's one thing that people can simply do to start to shift that. And another thing that's interesting in a sense is some people in 2020, it was just a matter really of some people's prayers actually being answered. Where maybe someone was in a job that they didn't like and they go, man, this job sucks. I don't like it. I'm not very happy here. And you got your wish. You got laid off, right? You're not working there anymore. But because we're focusing on the loss and not what's the positive here, that's going to create different results in our life.
I like that. That's some real talk right there. I mean, to add my own things, I mean, the other two, the two I tend to fall back on are gratitude and perspective. Those are the things I always fall back on, right? So
absolutely,
like you said, instead of focusing on the loss or the negatives or the things that you want but don't have, or the things you want to do but can't do, just being very grateful and hyper aware of all the things that you do have, right? If you're healthy, if you've got your friends, if you've got family, if you have a roof over your head, you have an internet connection and the ability to listen to this podcast, the fact that you can even hear, the fact that if you have eyes that are working, every little thing, every single finger, every toe, every little thing that's around you that you normally totally take for granted, just to focus on that. And then at the same time to, just maintain perspective and think, okay, actually there's 7 point something billion people in the world. If you're listening to this podcast, chances are you're probably in the top 10% of them. And you're certainly in the top 10% of people who have ever walked the surface of the earth in terms of the opportunities available to you, in terms of health, in terms of lack of war, lack of famine, all the things that used to just, have human beings dropping dead left, right, and center. I mean, even the fact that we're in a pandemic now, but, some people don't like it when I say this, but if you're going to compare this pandemic to ones historically, this is nothing. Right? if you look up the Spanish flu, if you look up the bubonic plague, if you look up, some of the pandemics of the past where people were just dropping dead in the streets, like just, you didn't need the media to tell you that there was something going on. Like
Right.
everyone was just getting hammered. So in the
Crazy.
grand scheme of things, it's like, okay, yeah, it sucks, but right. But relatively, things are
Yeah.
still great. Things
Yeah.
are still great, even if someone's lost their job, right? As long as you're not out on the street destitute, shaking a cup to, try to get some change. If you still have a roof over your head, you've still got access to food, etc., then, you're still blessed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing that I do in that same practice of gratitude is every morning that I wake up, I write down 10 things that I'm grateful for.
Mm.
And just like you said, like it can be, I'm grateful because I did this in business, or it could be grateful that I have air in my lungs, right? That my heart's
Mm.
beating for me every single day, thousands of times, and I never have to even ask it to do that. It just does it, and I'm alive because of that.
Mm.
So I think practicing the gratitude, that's absolutely huge. And if you can implement that into your daily life, just wake up, write down 5, 10 things you're grateful for. That's going to slowly allow you to shift some of your perspective and focus.
Yeah, 100%, man. Tell us a little bit more about your company, Finding Direction.
Yeah. So finding direction, it was really birthed out of that place that I touched on a little bit of just feeling lost, stuck, not knowing what I wanted to do with my life. Um, and yeah, just feeling in a horrible place. And because of that, and because I was determined enough, I said, I'm going to find a way. And I'm not only going to like find a way and settle and be like, okay, I'm making a little bit of money and I'm, you know, alive. And like, I was like, I want to figure out what's really going to light me up, because
Mm.
when I was in that business for 4 years, I got a taste of, you never work a day in your life if you love what you do. And they say once the mind expands, it can never contract. And so when I left that, when that no longer was what I was doing, I knew that it was possible to live a life that you were so passionate about, you were so excited that it truly didn't feel like you were working. And so I became on a mission to figure out what is that for me. And it took about 4 years, I would say, to really find that.
Mhm.
And then through the different tools and strategies that I kind of applied to my life in that process, now that's where Finding Direction University was really birthed of, how can we take people from this place of feeling lost, stuck, no idea what they want to do with their life. And it's been extraordinarily relevant in the last, 9 to 12 months.
Mhm.
Um, and how do we take them to a place that they realize that they can live a life that excites them, that has them waking up every single day going, man, like, holy shit, this is what I do for work. Like,
Mhm.
I get paid to do this. And so that's really what we do with that. And then the podcast is more just about helping figure out how have other people in life figured out what they want to do with their life, and then
Mhm.
how can we reverse engineer that to give our audience the tools and the strategies to get more clarity in their life.
Gotcha, man. I mean, there's often a debate about the notion of following your passion,
Yeah.
right? I'm someone who very much lives that and has done that. I literally do exactly what I want to do for a living. I'm a professional musician,
Yeah.
podcaster, author, like everything I do is very much like what I want to
Yeah.
do,
Totally.
right? And that's been very intentional. Like I didn't have to go that way. It was a long
Didn't
road
fall
to
into your lap.
no.
Yeah.
I could have gone a very different way, which would have been a lot more secure and comfortable, according to most people. But so there's always this debate about, should you follow your passion? You can go on YouTube probably, and you'll have videos saying why following your passion is terrible advice, and then you'll also have videos saying, why you should follow your passion. So
Yeah.
where do you? I have my own thoughts on that, but where do you fall on that spectrum?
Yeah, I think you want to do something that lights you up. So I think following your passion, yes, I think it's a good idea,
Mm.
but I think you need to be strategic about it. Some people say I'm passionate about X
Mm-hmm.
and I'm, going to do this all day with no vision of how can I turn this into a reality in my life.
Yeah.
I think when you have a passion, you want to start to reverse engineer it and say, if this is my passion, like let's say my passion is video gaming,
Mm-hmm.
how can I, in some way, shape, or form, build a life around this? And I think where most people get stuck is one, they just may have a passion, and that's where most people go.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe some people build a vision, and that's probably a smaller percentage of people. And then the very tiny percentage of people is the people that actually execute on that,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because execution trumps everything every single day.
Yep.
And so what I would share with anyone is absolutely follow your passion, right? What is it that lights you up? But more importantly, ask yourself, what's the vision you can build around that? And
Mhm.
then what's something you can do today to start getting closer to that vision? And then every single day, just take a step, a step, a step, a step. And then eventually, and it will take time because there's no such thing as overnight success,
Yep.
right? It will take time, but then you'll find yourself in maybe 5 years, 10 years, waking up being like, wow, I cannot believe I have this life.
Mm. Do you realistically think everybody can do that? Because that's something that I'm like, that's one
I
of
think
those things
everybody's
where,
I think everybody's
okay,
capable of it.
do you think
Will,
everyone's
wi-
do you think everyone's capable of earning a living doing something that fires them up?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think most people have the will to continue to pursue it because, like, there's something that I've noticed throughout my entrepreneurial journey is there's something called shiny object syndrome.
Hmm.
And it's like, especially with social media, you'll be pursuing something that's your passion. And all of a sudden, you'll see something on YouTube that's like this person being like, oh, I did this thing that's similar to what you're doing. And, in 2 months, I built this life that's incredible. And you're like, holy shit, like 2 months, like I should learn from this person.
Yeah.
And you come to find out that behind that, they actually had 10 years of a background doing something that helped them build that success for that one thing in 2 months. And it's that sometimes we buy into this lie, I guess you could say, that we can do this in a month and 2 months and 3 months or whatever.
Hmm.
And I'm just a believer that like everything takes longer than you expect it to. It's going to take more work. It's going to take more sweat. It's going to take more um, just getting creative. And
Hmm.
so I think most people are capable of it, but I don't think most people are willing to wait it out, to put in the
Yeah.
work, to put in the time, the energy. But if people are, right, and you may have to do some scrappy stuff on the side to
Yeah.
support
Yeah.
yourself,
Yeah.
but if you're willing to go through the gutters, then
Hmm.
you could definitely come out on the other side.
Yeah. It's an interesting perspective. Like I hear you. I don't know if I totally agree on it. I don't know if I totally agree. And
Yeah. What are your thoughts?
so I think you need, I think there are three elements to it. I think that, I think, I think following your passion is like, I think that's the sort of the artistic and creative side of me is very much like follow your passion.
Yeah.
And I think I'm like, yeah, but then I think there are also two caveats. I think number one, you have to be good, right? You have to be good. Like if your passion is basketball, or your passion is being a singer or being a dancer, but
Right.
you're just not massively
Yeah.
talented at it,
Yeah.
then no matter how passionate you are, you cannot, you're not going to succeed in that exact thing. You might be able to do something outside of it. Maybe you could be a
Something around.
commentator, right? Or
Right.
maybe you could be a commentator. Maybe you could make a YouTube channel talking about that thing. Maybe you could have a podcast about it, right? You can be involved in some way. But I think I think it's like delusional to say, okay, well, maybe I'm passionate about basketball, but I don't have the skills to be in the NBA. So,
Right.
and then I also think the second part is also, I think the second part is also, is there a demand for it? Like if you're talking about actually making a living, I think someone could be super passionate about, and I think now more than ever, you can make a living off your passion, even if your passion is very random and weird and
Yeah.
niche.
Yeah.
All right. I've seen enough weird YouTube channels to see that people can make a living doing all kinds of things. But
Right.
I think that there has to be at least enough. There does have to be enough Sorry, there has to be
Man.
enough of a demand. And I think if you can get those three things, I think if you can find something that you're passionate about, you're good at, and there is some market demand for it, then I think to me that's like the trifecta of like, okay, like if you've got that, you're gonna be a happy person,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
then, like you said, you feel like you're not working, right? Then you're doing what you're good at, you're passionate about it, you enjoy it, there's a demand for it, people are willing to compensate you for it in some way, shape, or
Right.
form, and then you're good. So I think those are like the additional. So I'm on board with following your passion,
Yeah.
but I like to like add those caveats just so I don't like have someone thinking, yeah, I really love football, so I'm going to be like a pro football player. And it's like, well, are you good at
Yeah.
football? Like,
Yeah.
are you like not just good? Are you like world class? Are you one of
Yeah.
the
One
best
percent of the
couple
1%
hundred
of the
people? Are
1%.
you best couple hundred people in the entire world at this thing? So
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think it comes down to like, when living a life that's built around your passion, that doesn't mean that you're making $1 million a year.
Yeah.
It's like, well, would you rather have someone pay you $250,000 a year to do something that you just don't enjoy, you don't like, you don't wake up excited about your life, or would
Mm-hmm.
or would you rather make, $80,000, $100,000 a year doing something that you're stoked on? So
Mm-hmm.
it's like also coming into that sort of conversation where it's like, you don't have to make $1 million doing what you're passionate about to be able to live your passion.
That's true. That's true. Um, so in terms of what you've got planned for this year, what are your plans for? Excuse me. What are your plans for 2021?
Yeah. So over the last 2 weeks or so, I took kind of a deep dive into like reviewing 2020 and looking at
Mm-hmm.
like what were some of the professional wins I had, what were some of the professional discoveries I had, what were some of the things that brought me the most joy in my life. That was a really big question for me. Was asking myself like, all right, in 2020, amongst all of the craziness in the world, amongst all of the things that I was doing in my professional life, what brought me the most joy at the end of the day?
Yeah.
And what I did is I went through like my photo album on my phone and just looked. I kind of like went through all the photos to get like a refresh of 2020. And one of the biggest discoveries for me was where I got the most joy in my life was through doing things with people that I really love.
Okay.
And mostly that being like trips, whether it was going away for a weekend, whether it was going on a week-long trip, but like that was something that brought me the most joy, was surrounding myself with people that I truly love. So for me, as I looked at that as one of my takeaways from 2020, now in 2021, I'm going to be much more intentional about scheduling time to go away with people that really mean something to me,
Mm-hmm.
and just be with them, just be present with them and be in that space. So I would say that's one of the biggest things of 2021. Another big thing in the business aspect was last year I discovered the 3 Ds,
Okay.
which is do it, defer it, and delegate it.
Okay.
And sometimes in business, I've become a person that tries to do everything. And
Guilty.
yeah. And when you try to do everything, sometimes it becomes overwhelming in a sense because you're like, well, I got to do this, that, and
Mm-hmm.
that. And then
Mm-hmm.
like, you're just like, oh, this is a lot.
Yeah.
Um, and really what I learned that massively changed my life last year was an emphasis on the delegate.
Mm-hmm.
Was what are the things that I'm good at that bring me the most joy? And then what are some of the more technical or, things that I can do, but they don't bring me joy. And they're not even the things that I'm the most skilled at. I'm just doing it because I need to do them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so last year I delegated all of those things, and the amount of just like incredibleness, if that's even a word, that it brought to my life was amazing. And
Yeah.
so as I go into 2021, I'm keeping an extraordinarily top of mind of what can I delegate,
Mm-hmm.
so that I make sure I'm doing the things that are most effective with my time and that also just bring me the most joy. So I would say those are two of the biggest things I'm focusing on 2021.
I hear that. What's your process for a delegation? How do you determine the things that you need to do or that you have to do versus the things that you should delegate?
Yeah, a question that I always ask myself in almost anything I do is the 80% rule,
Okay.
which is like, what is either 20% of the things that I do that bring me 80% of the joy, or it could be what are 20% of the things that I'm doing that are driving 80% of the results.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, sort of when I can look at that question, I can go, okay, this is like, let's say the podcast, for example, right? I have my own podcast, and 20% of what brought me joy and what I really enjoyed was actually doing stuff like this, like having conversations with people, researching them, figuring out, where did they come from? What was their life like? What built them into the person who they are?
Mm-hmm.
And then that's really what I enjoyed. Most of the things I didn't enjoy was editing, was finding the guest, was the scheduling, all of those things. So
Mm-hmm.
I basically just found someone um, that could do all of those things. I just went through like, an interview process.
Mm-hmm.
And then I brought someone to the team, and now they do everything for the podcast. I just do the parts that I actually enjoy.
Yeah.
Um, but I would say that question of the 20 to 80%,
Mm.
that's really what gives me an insight on what am I going to delegate, and then what am I actually going to do.
Yeah. No, that's a great perspective, man. Um, Another question I have is for, again, thinking of people who are listening to this, we're early on, very early on in the year.
Very.
And what are your thoughts on firstly, what are your thoughts on New Year's resolutions? I know people who are for them. I know people who are against them. I don't really make them myself. I maybe I do in a way, but not in any sort of traditional way. I'm someone who kind of has like rolling goals.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything magical about the 1st of January that makes me be like, okay, this year, maybe if I were someone who had like some like really, really sort of like negative or destructive habits or addictions or something, it would kind
Right.
of be easier for me to be like, okay, I'm going to quit smoking this year, or I'm going to stop drinking. But like, I don't smoke. I don't drink. Like, I already don't do those things.
Yeah, you got some
Sometimes I
good
feel like
habits.
sometimes I feel like I need to pick up some horrible habits so that so that I can like break them and then like make a big deal about it, you know?
Yeah.
Because I see other people like, yeah, I've been sober for 1 year, and I'm like, man, I've been sober for like, you know,
A long time.
yeah, over a decade. Um, yeah. So, what are your thoughts on New Year's resolutions? Do you think that they're generally a good idea, or do you prefer to do things in a different way?
Yeah, I think what it does at New Year's is it allows you to sort of measure where you're at in your life.
Okay.
Um, and one of the things Tony always says to us is that you can't manage what you can't measure. And so I think really what happens at New Year's is it's kind of like a worldly thing is not the entire world, but a lot of people with their New Year's resolution go, all right, I'm going to measure what happened in 2020
Hmm.
and what do I want to shift? What do I want to change so that I can get closer to my ultimate goal?
Hmm.
And that's what most people are doing for New Year's. And I think that is a great thing to do. Right now, because people do it once a year, it's like like they say there's this analogy of a plane
Yeah.
is that when a plane's flying, let's say from San Francisco to New York, I think more than 90% of the time the plane is off task, but it has to keep correcting so that it ultimately gets to its destination.
Hmm.
So what's happening when people have a New Year's resolution is they're setting new intentions, they're measuring what happened last year, and then they're going on autopilot for 12 months. And then 12
Hmm.
months later, they're going, okay, let me relook at my life, measure, adjust, pivot. And it's helpful. It's better than not doing it.
Hmm.
But what I would suggest to people is how can you do that maybe on a quarterly basis,
Okay.
right? So maybe every 3 months, you imagine every 3 months is January 1st. And you go, okay, what happened in these last 3 months? How can I measure it? How can I adjust? How can I pivot so that I can get closer to where I ultimately want to go and track and measure if I'm actually on track, if I'm on pace to get to where I want.
Hmm.
If you want to be more meticulous, do it every month. If you want to be even more meticulous, do it every week or do it every single day. But the more you measure yourself, the more you can know, are you on track? Are you not? And then you can pivot to get to where you want to be. So, I think New Year's resolutions are a great thing,
Hmm.
but I think, quarterly resolutions are an even
Or
better thing.
I hear that totally, man. And
Yeah.
when it comes to setting goals, what's your personal way of setting goals?
I'm a big reverse engineer person.
Okay.
So, figuring out what is it that I want to achieve, and then how can I break that into, let's say in 2021, I have a goal that I want to achieve X.
Hmm.
Well, if I want to achieve X in 2021, what do I need to achieve each quarter? If I want to do that each quarter, what do I need to do each month, each week, each day? And that's kind of how I break that down.
Okay.
As far as like in the numbers sense. Um, and then in the other part, a big part of my goal setting, especially this year, is just asking myself, how can I be more present? How
Hmm.
can I experience life more? Um, because sometimes I get caught up in that achiever dilemma of go, 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 do, achieve,
Yep.
achieve,
Yep.
achieve, create, do. And then all of a sudden you get at the end, you're like, holy shit, what happened the last 6 months?
Yeah. Yeah. And you don't
Um,
get to enjoy it either, really, sometimes.
yeah.
Yeah, it's something
So
that's something I can suffer from. Like where I work so hard and I just every day, day in, day out, 7 days a week, I'm just going hard, and then like I find it hard to even when I want to relax, I find it hard because I start feeling guilty almost. I'm
yeah,
like, oh man, I haven't hit my goals yet. Like I should be doing something. Maybe I should edit this, or I should film that, or I should write another song, or I should
yeah,
put out another tweet, post another thing on Facebook, and it's just I need to get better myself at. I think one thing I actually need to do this year for me personally, maybe this is my resolution, is I actually
yeah.
need to like relax more.
Hmm.
Like I need to allow myself to relax more and like just rest more, both in terms of actual sleep. My sleep last year was averaging less than 6 hours a night.
Yeah.
So I need to sleep more, and I need to just like allow myself every day to, relax, even if it's for like an hour or two, just to,
Yeah, just breathe.
yeah, yeah. Because I do feel like, okay, I always have to be doing something. And you know what it's like when you feel that way, oftentimes what you start considering productive is not actually productive. You just start finding yourself on social media, like just looking at stuff or
For
post about. It's
sure.
like, okay,
Rabbit
there's not,
hole.
yeah, the intentionality is gone. You're just doing something. For some reason, doing that feels better than like playing Xbox,
Yeah,
right? Like if I play Xbox, I get that guilty feeling. If I'm there like on Twitter, like putting out stuff and interacting, then even if it's not business related, like I somehow feel like, okay, this one's work, but that one's bad, So that's something I personally need to work on.
yeah, yeah. One of the biggest lessons I got when I was in my early 20s was because I had success in this business. My whole belief was like, when I get to this point,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to feel happy. I'm going to feel achieved. I'm going to feel accomplished. And then when I got there, I kind of had this moment of like, holy shit, like this, this is it. Um, and something that I learned from Tony is,
Mm-hmm.
he's like, when you get to that moment, who's the person that ultimately decides that you're going to be happy at that point? It's you.
Mm.
Right. And so it's like, well, then why wait to be happy? Why not? Like there's this saying, it says, don't achieve to be happy, but happily achieve.
Mm, I like
And
that.
so that's something that I've kind of put into my life is rather than me trying to get here so that I can be happy, how can I be happy now through the process of getting to that goal or to that place?
I hear that, man. What's the
Yeah.
biggest thing that you think that you need to work on?
The biggest thing that I need to work on, that's a good question. Um,
Because I know when people listen to these podcasts or like certain people or whatever, I think they get the idea of like, oh, these guys have no problems, or like their mindsets are so right. You kind of get
yeah.
that guru thing where it's like, oh my gosh, like this guy is just like everything is going well and it's fine, and it's like, yeah, like nah, we're all still human. Like I'm still on this journey trying to like,
Yeah.
I've worked out some things and I like to share the things that I've worked out with other people. I think you're the same, but it's like,
Yeah.
man, there's a whole lot that I'm not there yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that I need to work on um, is getting closer to someone that I can model to get to the goals that I want to get to in my life. Because
Okay.
I'm a big person that's like just do it and go and move and figure it out along the way. And you do that enough, eventually you'll get to where you want to be.
Hmm.
Like I would rather take action than sit around for 6 months and go, well, what's the best way to do this or do that? And then what if I do this and that doesn't work? Like I'm more so like, let's act now
Hmm.
and I'll figure it out along the process. I think one of the biggest things I need to work on is pairing that with, okay, well, what's the real strategy that I want to implement here? And more specifically, who's someone that's already done this, that knows the strategy that I could
Hmm.
just pick their brain and learn that strategy and then, really get to where I want to get quicker. I think that's a big thing I need to work on.
I hear that, man. And what are your long-term goals? What is it that you're trying to achieve in this life?
Yeah, the biggest thing is just making an impact
Okay.
and really helping people. I just feel that's why I'm here on this world is to just make an impact.
Hmm.
So I think that's one of my long-term goals, and a big part of that is with finding direction. And finding direction, we have three pillars, which we are two of the three pillars right now. One is the podcast, two is the university, and then three will ultimately be live events,
Hmm.
right? And so helping people come into a live event, not knowing what they want to do with their life in a matter of 2 or 3 days, helping them really get clarity on what they want to do with their life. And so that's really a big vision, long-term vision.
Hmm.
And then another long-term vision is just making sure that I massively, massively, massively enjoy the process.
Okay.
Um, because I don't want to say, oh, I want to have those three pillars and build that, have this many people that we're impacting, and then that's when I'm really going to enjoy my life. That's not the approach I want to take. I want to go, how can I extract as much joy as possible and passion and fun and fulfillment in this moment right now
Hmm.
and continue to do that every single day while I'm achieving some of those goals that I have
Yeah.
in a business sense.
I get you. And how do you measure your achievement? Because I'm similar. Like I always say, my life goal is to have a positive impact on over 10 million people.
Love it.
Um, and I mean, I put it used to be a million, but I think I think I've possibly achieved that.
Let's go.
So, and I
Congrats.
read thank you. But how do you measure that impact? How do you do that? Is that just from, I don't know, emails and social media, or is it from follower numbers, or is it listener numbers, or what metrics or data, or
Yeah.
how do you feel that sense of like, okay, I'm impacting this many people now compared to that many people before? How do you
Yeah.
measure that?
Yeah. So something interesting that's just coming to my mind that I'll share that is kind of going to be a little bit of a different answer, and then I can
Hmm.
circle back to that. Um, but so Tony Robbins, he has this event. It's called Date with Destiny.
Hmm.
And one of the things you learn there is something called the primary question. And essentially, what it means is that every single day we ask ourselves a question, at least once a day, if not multiple times every single day.
Hmm.
And it drives us in a really positive way. But also, there's a lot of not positive things we get from it because it's unconscious.
Okay.
And so, one of the primary questions I discovered that I had this year was how can I make more of an impact?
Hmm.
And it's a great question because it gives me drive. It makes me want to impact people. It makes me want to help people. It makes me work longer because I want to make that impact.
Hmm.
Um, and I have a big goal to impact a lot of people. But part of the negative from it is because I'm seeking how can I make more of an impact, that by default means that, well, I'm not making enough of an impact,
Hmm.
right? That presupposes that I'm not making enough of an impact. And so
Yeah.
I sort of reframed that this year and asking myself a new primary question, which was how can I appreciate the impact, the difference in the love that I'm creating in the world right now?
Mm-hmm.
And
That's a,
this one question, say
no,
that
it's good.
again,
That's a great question. That's a great question.
because it's like, yeah, maybe the goal is to impact millions of people,
Hmm.
but if I can't appreciate the fact when I make a difference in one person's life, in 10
Yeah.
people's life, in 20 people's lives, then like, what does the millions really mean? And so,
I'm taking that from you, man. I'm taking
yeah,
that.
it's
Yeah,
been a
that
huge shift.
that feels very applicable for where I am right now. So
Yeah.
I'm
And
gonna,
it's
yeah.
like, instead of going throughout my day and going like, how can I make an impact, or how can I impact more? How can I, it's like I'll stop and I'll ask myself, how can I appreciate all the impact, the difference, and the love that I'm creating in the
Mm,
world right now? And it, like, every time I ask, it gives me like goosebumps in my body of like, holy shit, I'm making a difference in people's lives. Like, I am helping people. I am
mhm,
creating love in this world. I'm making a difference. Like, I am doing those very things. And by feeling that, it allows me to show up even more present as the person that I want to be, which in turn will help me get to that goal even quicker.
mhm.
Um, so I would say that's kind of a big shift that I've made this year. And then how I measure it is, yeah, like you said, just a lot of the analytics,
Yeah.
of more so looking at, what are downloads for our podcast, what are, our social media, what is that reaching, what are
Mhm.
emails reaching. I would say that's a little bit more of how I do that. And then that comes back to the 20-80 question of, well,
Got it.
what was 20% of the stuff we did that made 80% of the impact? And how can we double down on that 20%?
Awesome, man. So before we wrap up, I've got one question
Yeah.
that I want to ask for the benefit of everyone who is tuning in, whether live or you're listening on the podcast. And if you could give people a piece of advice or a word of encouragement for 2021, what would you tell them?
Yeah. I would say start with gratitude. Write down 10 things every single morning, whether you want to or not. The mornings you
Mhm.
don't want to do it, write down 20 that morning. Um, and write down gratitude and really practice gratitude in your life. I think that's the biggest thing that you can start to implement. And then just
Mhm.
asking yourself every day, what is one thing I can do today to move to move in a forward direction, and
Mhm.
not overwhelming yourself with, I got this big mountain I got to climb and there's all this stuff, and get overwhelmed with that. Just practice gratitude, write down 10 things you're grateful for. And at the end of that, ask yourself, what's one thing I can do today to get closer to the life that I want to live?
Yeah. Awesome, man. I love it. Stu, how can people find you online?
Yeah, if people want to get a hold of me, I would say the best place to go is, we're doing some stuff with Finding Direction University. And if people want to get a free tool that we have, I'm a massive believer in having clarity in your life. And, if you don't have clarity, you're not going to execute, right? They say the enemy of execution is complexity.
Mhm.
And so we have a free document if people want to get access to it. It's called 3 Steps to Finding Direction. And if they want to get access to that, you just go to findingdirectionuniversity.com/3 steps, and they can get that there. So, I would say that's probably the best place for people to go to get in touch with us. And if you have questions or if I can support in any way, reach out, and I'm happy to support in any way that I can.
Awesome. Stu, thank you so much for coming on the show, man. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. You've been the first guest of 2021, and you always will be. So no doubt, man. I wish you good luck with everything you're doing. And I hope people have listened to this and can take some inspiration from it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me, Zuby. I appreciate it, man. It was good catching up.
No doubt, man. Take care.
Cheers.
I do not scam. Put some respect on my name. Sick like a vein, clicking a bang.